Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Virtual Professor. I'm Dr. Maxine Bryant, and I am committed to changing society one class at a time. At The Virtual Professor, we are dedicated to educating, informing, and inspiring our listening audience to get involved, to do something, to become a part of the change they want to see happen in their communities. We want to be a part of that change and not just talk about the problems, but rather engage in viable solutions. So today, we're going to be talking about immigration and the wall. Now, there's been a lot of talk in our communities throughout our country about immigration and the wall, particularly the southern border. What's happening? What's going on? I want to use today's segment to inform you and perhaps clarify some misconceptions and just educate. So let's talk about immigration and the wall. The first thing I want to cover is what's happening with the immigrants at the southern border. How are they being treated? Now, immigrants are held by ICE, and ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this entity, ICE, holds immigrants as civil detainees. They're civil detainees. They're not criminals, right? But yet it seems that they're being treated as criminals. And there's a term actually that's being coined called crimigation, where we are criminalizing immigration. Their detention actually is not meant to be punitive. However, it does seem like that's the case. Homeland Security, as a matter of fact, reported that there have been many very negligent violations at least two detention centers that it inspected. Nooses in cells, inadequate medical care, rotten food being fed to the immigrants. As a matter of fact, 24 people have died in ICE custody during this administration alone. I got that from NBC News in January of 2019. So what's happening? Abuse, neglect. Now, all of these type of things happened in the Obama administration, admittedly. However, one person reported that Donald Trump seems to relish in these types of mishappenings, if you will. As of June 2019, the average number of detainees in ICE custody was 52,500 every day. Now, with that large number, you can imagine that indeed there are some children who are also ICE detainees, if you will. We already know that children are detained, they've been maltreated, they're being separated from their parents. But what about those youth who find conditions in Mexico, their own country, so unbearable that they willingly risk leaving their home to try to come to the United States, knowing full well what lies ahead? Many of these youth, usually teenage Mexican boys, would leave Mexico to try to enter the United States willingly, even though they know that if they make it, they're going to be housed in inadequate facilities. They're going to be facing hunger on the way to the United States, as well as when they get here. They're going to be facing violence. There's a serious lack of health care. They're facing the prospect of torture and maybe even death. But yet, knowing the dangers, the perils, that's better than what lies for them or waits for them in Mexico. In my research, some of the things that I found out, particularly from the New York Times, I read an article in particular that was written on October the 19th, 2019. It says that being apprehended, or the possibility of being apprehended, facing unimaginable horrors is actually better than what waits for them at home. Threats of being initiated into gangs, and gangs threatening to kill family members, and violence and unbearable poverty. I read the story of one young teenage boy who said that the gangs told him if he did not join, they were going to kill his family and eventually get him. For the sake of his family, he chose to leave Mexico and try to get to the United States. As I read more and more about the plight of children and families who leave Mexico trying to come here, I was reminded of what we've learned about the Underground Railroad when African Americans were leaving the southern states in hope of a better life up north. And there were families that would help them along the way. And word spread about where were the safe places to go, where were places to avoid, which route was the least likely to result in capture by the slave capturers. And the same type of things are happening even now with Mexico, or Mexicans rather. There's a network of people who are trying to help them, just like there was a network of people trying to help African Americans leave slavery and Jim Crow era. So there's a kinship, if you will, at least an understanding between, or should be, between African Americans and what many Mexican immigrants are facing even today. Let's talk about the wall. Now, it's not like a wall did not exist. We know that. In South rural Texas, there's an 8-mile stretch of wall that's under construction in the town of Donna, Texas. That's costing the U.S. citizens about $167 million. Now, west of Donna, there's a second 3-mile stretch of wall being constructed. To date, nearly $10 billion has been diverted from government agencies for wall funding. Two things I want to say about that. First of all, in his presidential campaign promise, Donald Trump said the United States would not pay for the wall, but rather Mexico would. So, how much money do you think Mexico has contributed so far to the building of the wall? If you said zero, you were correct. We have been funding 100% of it. And remember what I just said. Over $10 billion has been diverted from government agencies. That means Social Security, education, food, aid to families with dependent children. All of those social programs are losing money to fund a wall that is controversial, to say the least. Reportedly, about 80 to 90 miles of the wall will be constructed over the next year and a half. And these walls are not connected. So where there is a gap, there will be humans who will be monitoring the wall, so to speak. About 78 miles of existing wall has been replaced since 2017. Now, Donald Trump says that these walls are unclimbable, no one can penetrate through them. However, there are videos that have been posted on social media showing men scaling or climbing over the walls. And the Washington Post even reported that there are new sections of this wall that have been repeatedly sawed through, creating a gap large enough for people to pass through. And these are the new unpenetratable walls, supposedly, that are being built. Now, interestingly, what I found out is that the United States government has not disclosed the cutting incidents and the breaches in the secured walls. So we don't really know how many times this has occurred. U.S. Customs and Border Protection have declined to provide the actual number of breaches and the location of the incidents. And what are the processes for repairs? We don't have that kind of information. So I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of controversy around the building and construction and the need for such a wall. So there's some who say that it's ineffective. Why? Because first of all, there are a lot of undocumented people who are here, right? They came legally and they overstayed their visas. The other thing that people complain about is that cartels can outsmart checkpoints. Now, remember I said that there are gaps in the wall that are monitored by human beings? Well, money oftentimes can buy a lot. So you may have a corrupt inspection officer. There are weak links in the system. And so people are able to get through. Also, I want you to remember that most terrorists are not undocumented people from Mexico. There is no evidence whatsoever that any terrorist has entered the United States through the Mexican land boundary. As a matter of fact, most of our terrorists are homegrown. This is an interesting fact that I found out. Of the 154 foreign terrorists who committed or plotted to commit a terrorist attack on United States soil from 1975 to 2015, only one was Mexican. Only one. Many people who come into the United States, particularly from Mexico, who are on a terrorist list or what have you, come by air or ship or boat. So another question that came to my mind in my research was, why do we fear immigrants? What's up with that? In my research, one of the things I found out was that Donald Trump has hired undocumented workers consistently for over 2 decades, over 20 years. And I found out why. Employing illegal workers gives a company a competitive edge because they don't have to pay them as much. Undocumented laborers are less likely to risk job changes, and they're less likely to complain if anything is happening. They're being mistreated. Trump, it's being said, doesn't want undocumented people in the country. However, at his property, he still holds them. That was reported by the Post. And I shouldn't say hold. It's not like they're being held against their will, but he still employs them. So there's a law, if you will, or a program, and it's called the U.S. House 2B Visa Program. And what it does, it allows undocumented workers to stay. A company can extend, if you will, their visa for a period of time. Someone, a guy named Campbell, found, and he told the Washington Post this, that only one out of 144 jobs available at Trump properties during 2016 and 2017 was an American worker. What happens to the rest? Their visas have been expanded. Now, normally that's only supposed to happen when there's a shortage of American workers. That's obviously not the case. The Trump administration reportedly temporarily expanded the guest worker visa, if you will, in 2017, at the same time restricting avenues of legal immigration, right, particularly for highly skilled workers. Now, employers are supposed to, as I said before, attempt to find American workers before hiring the H-2B immigrants. But documents show that the Trump organization makes a very minimum effort to recruit U.S. citizens to fill open positions. So that's interesting. Another interesting thing that I found out was that employers who hire an abundance of illegal workers are not penalized, just the workers themselves. Between the spring of 2018 and 2019, 11 individuals, no companies whatsoever, were prosecuted for employing undocumented workers. During the same time, over 85,000 people were prosecuted for entering the United States illegally. I found that information from Syracuse University immigration records. So what's all the hoopla about when we talk about immigration and the wall? What's the real reason for trying to block immigration while at the same time creating loopholes to allow immigrants who are undocumented to stay and work for certain organizations? I think it is up to us, United States citizens, to begin to ask some pertinent questions and seek some really relevant and concrete answers. Again, I can't urge you enough. Get involved in your local political structure. Begin to ask some questions. Start doing your own research. Begin to rally around some causes. That's how we create change. That's what I'm trying to do, one class at a time. This has been Dr. Maxine Bryant with the Virtual Professor.